A policy speech on the Lee administration's second supplementary budget will soon be delivered at the National Assembly's plenary session. The government is expected to lay out details of the proposal and seek cooperation from Parliament. U.S. President Donald Trump says U.S. and Iranian officials will talk next week and hinted that they may sign an agreement, giving cautious hopes for longer-term peace in the Middle East. NATO member countries have committed to investing 5% of their GDP annually on defense spending. The new spending target will be achieved over the next 10 years. Thanks for joining our special live coverage of the speech on this year's supplementary budget. It's 10 a.m. here in Seoul, and President Lee Jae-myung is expected to deliver his budget speech at the National Assembly. Now, in just a few moments, President Lee Jae-myung will likely address lawmakers on the second extra budget plan, aimed at boosting spending and reviving the country's economy. He is expected to ask for bipartisan support on the plan now that the supplementary budget bill, the second this year and the first since President Lee took office earlier this month, was approved by the cabinet last week. The extra budget plan, worth 30.5 trillion Korean won or 22 billion US dollars, includes 20.2 trillion Korean won of new spending to spur economic growth and 10.3 trillion Korean won to make up for an expected shortfall in tax revenue. Now, a large amount of that new spending will be used to hand out cash to consumers to boost spending. The government is looking to give 10.3 trillion Korean won in vouchers ranging in value from 150,000 Korean won to 500,000 to each and every citizen, depending on income levels. Now, since taking office earlier this month after the snap election in early June, President Lee Jae-myung has been working to get bipartisan support for the budget plan. Today's speech comes after President Lee Jae-myung met with leaders of the country's two major political parties over the weekend. There, he spoke to leaders of the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party at the presidential residence on Sunday, where he acknowledged differing views on the proposed supplementary budget, but stressed the need to build consensus to swiftly tackle economic challenges. Again, we are expected to see the president make his speech on the second supplementary budget. The extra budget plan, worth 30.5 trillion Korean won or 22 billion US dollars, includes 20.2 trillion won of new spending to spur economic growth and 10.3 trillion won to make up for an expected shortfall in tax revenue. Now, a large amount of this new spending includes a cash handout scheme to all Korean consumers to boost spending, as the extra budget plan is aimed at reviving the country's economy and boosting spending. So as we wait for the president to give his speech, since taking office earlier this month, President Lee Jae-myung has been working to get bipartisan support for the budget plan. And again, today's speech comes after President Lee Jae-myung met with leaders of the country's two major political parties, Democratic Party and the People Power Party, over the weekend. He spoke to leaders of the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party at the presidential residence on Sunday, where he acknowledged differing views on the proposed supplementary budget, but stressed the need to build consensus to swiftly tackle economic challenges. Again, we are expected to see the president make his speech on the second extra budget. In just a few moments, President Lee Jae-myung will likely address lawmakers to get bipartisan support aimed at boosting spending and reviving the country's economy. He's expected to ask for that support on the plan now that the supplementary budget bill, the second this year and the first since President Lee took office earlier this month, we are seeing National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik entering the National Assembly, and in just a few moments, President Lee will likely address these lawmakers at the National Assembly on the second extra budget plan. The extra budget plan, worth 30.5 trillion Korean won or 22 billion US dollars, includes 20.2 trillion won of new spending to spur economic growth and 10.3 trillion won to make up for an expected shortfall in tax revenue. Now let's go over to the National Assembly. We'll come back right afterwards.
So in today's meeting, we will go over the proposals that were submitted in the 23rd meeting, and this will be about the supplementary budget plan, and we will be providing the administrative address from the government. President Lee Jae-myung will come to the National Assembly to provide the address himself. And after the 22nd National Assembly's opening, it is the first administrative address to be provided by the President. We hope today's address will be one that shows where the government and the National Assembly will communicate closely and cooperate. So this will be about the allocation of additional budget and also the stabilization of the economy. And we already started the preliminary review. So as the preliminary review on the budget has been started, we are beseeching you to go through with it very quickly. And we hope to ask you to go through the review closely and in a manner that is very smooth. And we hope that this will be one where we can console our citizens and provide them with hope as well. And it is really important that we go through with thorough review and ratification. So we would like to ask for bipartisan support. So now it is 2025, and we will hear the administrative address about the supplementary budget of the government. And soon, President Lee will enter and start his address.
Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik speak on the extra second supplementary budget. And in just a few moments, we will see President Lee Jae-myung enter the National Assembly to address lawmakers on the extra budget plan aimed at boosting spending and reviving the country's economy. We are now seeing President Lee entering the National Assembly to give his speech on the second supplementary budget. You see him now shaking hands with all the lawmakers at the National Assembly, where he will likely ask for bipartisan support on this extra budget plan now that the supplementary budget bill, the second this year and the first since President Lee took office after the snap elections earlier this month, was approved by the cabinet last week. Now we see President Lee Jae-myung at the National Assembly now shaking hands with all the lawmakers, where he is likely to ask for bipartisan support while giving his speech at the National Assembly today. Now this extra budget plan that's worth 30.5 trillion Korean won, that's about 22 billion US dollars. This includes 20.2 trillion won of new spending to spur economic growth after President Lee Jae-myung vowed to revive the country's economy upon inauguration. And 10.3 trillion Korean won will be used to make up for an expected shortfall in tax revenue. And a large amount of this new spending of 20.2 trillion Korean won will be used to hand out cash to consumers as the government is aiming to boost spending to revive the country's economy. The government is looking to give 10.3 trillion Korean won in vouchers ranging in value from 150,000 Korean won to 500,000 to each and every citizen, depending on income levels. And since taking office earlier this month, President Lee has been working to get bipartisan support on this plan. Now we see him walking up to the podium, and we'll come back right afterwards.
존경하는
honorable citizens,
그리고 의원실
and
국회의원님과
Mr. Speaker Won-sik,
의장님과
and
여러 국회의원 여러분.
many National Assemblymen.
저는 지난 6월 4일
Last June
이곳
4th,
국회에서
here at the National
대통령
Assembly,
취임 선서를
while
통해
officially swearing in as the president,
국민이 주인인 나라,
through the address, I
다시
promised to
힘차게
make this
성장,
country into
발전하는
one
나라.
owned by the citizens, one that strongly
모두
grows and
함께
advances
잘
once
사는
more,
문화가
and a country
꽃피는
where
나라.
everyone lives well while
그리고
culture
안전하고
flourishes
평화로운 나라를
in
만들겠다고
a safe and
약속드렸습니다.
peaceful manner.
무너진 경제를 회복하고
The recovery of the collapsed
민생
economy
경제를 살리는
and
일은
revitalization
지금
of the
우리가
livelihoods
해결해야 할
is an
가장
urgent task
시급한 과제입니다.
that we must resolve right now.
요즘처럼 저성장이
If the
지속되면
current low
기회의
growth
문이
were to
좁아지고
continue, door to
경쟁과
opportunity will
갈등이
shrink,
격화되는
and
악순환에
competition and conflicts
빠지게
will
됩니다.
exacerbate, leading to a vicious cycle.
새로운 성장 동력을
We need to
만들고
create new growth engine,
성장의 기회와 결과를
and
함께
growth
나누는
opportunities and results should be shared together.
공정성장의 문을
Such a
열어야
gateway to fair
양극화와
growth needs to be opened up to
불평등을
mitigate bipolarization and
모두가 함께
inequality,
잘 사는 세상으로
resulting in a world
나아갈 수
where
있습니다.
everyone can flourish together.
자본시장도 정상화해야
Capital
합니다.
market also has to be normalized.
자본시장의 투명성과
Once
공정성을
capital markets,
회복하면
transparency, and
경제도
fairness
살고
are recovered,
기업도
economy
제대로
will be
성장,
vitalized,
발전하는
and corporate will
선순환으로
grow, leading to
우리
a
국민
virtuous cycle,
모두가 바라는
and this
코스피
will
5천 시대를
welcome an era
열어젖힐
where
수 있습니다.
KOSPI reaches 5,000 points, which is something that
인공지능,
everyone hopes for.
반도체 등
Artificial intelligence,
기술 산업에
semiconductor, and
대대적으로
other
투자하고
advanced technology industries require massive
재생 에너지
investment,
중심의
and
에너지 전환을
renewable
조속하게
energy-centered
완료하여
energy conversion should also be
기후위기와
quickly completed
R200에
to act
대응해야
on
합니다.
climate crisis and
바이오
RE100.
산업과 제조
We also
혁신,
need to make efforts in the
문화산업,
bio industry
육성에도
and
힘을
innovation of
기울여서
manufacturing, in addition to
세계를
fostering a
선도하는
cultural industry
대한민국을
to ensure that
만들어야
Korea
합니다.
can become a leader in the world.
외교에는
There
색깔이
is
없습니다.
no color in diplomacy.
진보냐,
It is not
보수냐가
about
아니라
being progressive or
국익이냐
conservative.
아니냐가
Whether or
유일한
not it
선택
is a
기준이
national profit
되어야
or
합니다.
not should be the only criteria for selection.
감사합니다.
Thank
우리
you.
국민의힘 의원들은 반응이 없는데 이러면 좀
Thank you.
쑥스러우니까
I feel a bit embarrassed when you do this, but
국익 중심의 실용 외교로
through national profit
공상과
center
공급망
practical
문제를
diplomacy, we should be countering
국제
issues
질서
related
변화에
to trade and
슬기롭게
supply
대응해야
chain
합니다.
and other changes in the international
한반도와
order.
한반도의
Above
평화와
all,
안정을
securing
확보하는
peace and
일도
stability in the
더없이
Korean peninsula
중요한
is also critical.
평화가 밥이고
Peace is our
평화가
staple,
곧
and peace
경제입니다.
is the economy.
평화가 경제 성장을
Peace
이끌어내고
leads to economic growth,
다시
and
평화를
economy
강화하는
strengthens peace once
선순환을
again.
통해
And I'll create such a
국민의
virtuous
일상이
cycle
흔들리지
so
않는
that the
나라를
livelihoods
꼭
of our citizens
만들겠습니다.
do not falter.
이 자리를 빌려
I would like to take
국민
this
여러분께
opportunity
간곡하게
to beseech
협조
our
요청을
citizens
드립니다.
for cooperation.
새로운 나라,
A new country,
진짜 대한민국을
the true
만드는 일은
Republic of Korea,
대통령 혼자
cannot be made
또는
through
특정한
the efforts
소수가 할
of the
수
president
있는 일이
alone or
아닙니다.
through just a few people.
예측 가능하고
For us to
합리적인
create a
사회를 만들기
predictable and
위해서는
reasonable society,
우리 모두가
we all
최소한의
need
합의를
to be able
꼭
to reach
지켜야
a
합니다.
minimal consensus.
규칙을 어겨서는
By
이익을 볼
violating
수
rules,
없고
we cannot reap profit.
규칙을 지켜도
And even
결코
if we're to
손해
keep
보지 않는
rules,
그런 공정한
if we were
사회를
to create a fair
만드는 일
society
역시
without suffering any harm,
모두의 협력
this
없이는
cannot be achieved this
불가능합니다.
without the cooperation of everyone.
공정하게
We
노력해서
need to make fair
일궈낸
efforts
정당한
and
성공에는
applaud those
우리
that
모두가
accomplish
박수를
fair
보내는
success.
그런 합리적인
And such a
사회를
society
꼭
should be the
만들어야겠습니다.
one that should be created.
기득권과 특권,
Vested rights and
세치기와
privilege,
편법으로
line
움직이는
cutting
나라가
and
아니라
expediency should not be the
공정의
driver
토대
of our
위에
country.
모두가
On a fair
질서를 지키는
foundation, everyone should
상식적이고
keep order to create a
합리적인 사회로
sensible and
나아가야 하는 것입니다.
reasonable society.
새로운 사회로 변화하는
The process
과정은
to change to a such a
고통을
new society
수반하지만
also accompanies pain,
건물을 걷어내야
but we need to get rid of the weeds
뿌릴 수
to
있습니다.
be able to sow seeds.
하나된 힘으로
Korea has stood as one to
극복해온
overcome many different
위대한
obstacles,
우리 대한 국민들의
and
저력이라면
with such a
어떤
strong power
어려움도
of our citizens,
능히
I believe
이겨낼
we
수
will be able to
있다고
overcome any
확신합니다.
sort of difficulties.
작은 차이를
If we
인정하고
recognize small
포용하면
differences and
새롭게
be inclusive,
출발할 수
then we can
있습니다.
start anew.
짧은 기간이지만
It has only been
이미
a
많은
short
것들이
amount of
회복되고
time, however,
정상화되고
many has
있습니다.
already been recovered and
이제
are being normalized.
한 걸음 더
Now,
나아갑시다.
let us take the next
우리는
step forward.
할 수 있다는 것을
We can do it,
국민들께
and
보여줍시다.
I would like to show this to our citizens.
존경하는 국민 여러분,
Honorable citizens
그리고 더불어민주당,
and
국민의힘,
national
조국 혁신당을
assemblymen
포함한
from
개의원
many different parties.
오늘 저는 정부가 추가
Today,
경정 예산안을 편성한
Regarding the
이유와
government's
주요 내용을
allocation
직접
of
설명드리고
supplementary budget and
국회
details, I would like to
협조를
explain it
구하고자 이
myself,
자리에
and I stand here
왔습니다.
to ask for the National Assembly's
인수위원회도 없이
cooperation.
출범한 정부가
Without a handover committee, the government
추가
came into
경정
office,
예산안을
and we
편성한
urgently
이유는
allocated this supplementary
우리 경제가
budget
처한
because
상황이
our
그만큼
government is currently
절박하기
facing a
때문입니다.
very dire situation.
지금 우리 대한민국은
Korea right now
매우 엄중한
is going
시기를
through
지나고
a
있습니다.
very serious period.
수출 회복이 더딘 가운데
While export is
내수마저
slow in
어려움을 겪고
recovering,
있습니다.
domestic demand is also facing
고물가,
difficulties.
고금리,
High inflation, high interest rate, and high exchange
경제
rate
성장률은 4분기
continues
연속
with economic growth
0%대에
rate
머물고
staying at
심지어
0% rate
지난
level for 4
1분기는
quarters in a row.
마이너스 성장을
And
하기도
actually,
했습니다.
in the first quarter, we faced
중산층의
negative
소비
growth.
여력은 줄어들고
The consumption power of the
자영업자들의
middle class
빚은
are
더 이상
decreasing, and
감내할
the
수
debt
없는
of the
수준에
small
이르고
businesses
있습니다.
are at a level that can no
세부
longer
경제
be
지표를
handled.
살펴보면
And if we take a look at the
민생의
detailed economic
어려움이 더욱
metrics,
여실히 드러납니다.
the difficulties of the
올
livelihoods
초까지
are even more stark.
소비,
So until the
투자
beginning
심리
of the
모두
year,
악화
the
일로입니다.
consumption and investment sentiments were
올해
all
1분기
in a
정부
vicious
소비,
path.
민간 소비,
If
설비
we look
투자,
at the government
건설 투자가 모두
consumption, the private consumption,
역성장했습니다.
and the
즉,
equipment investment and
줄어들었다는
construction
뜻입니다.
investment for this year's first quarter, they
구직을
were all
다니냐만
facing degrowth.
청년들의
It means that it
숫자는
was
역대
decreasing.
최고 수준을
As for
기록합니다.
youths that are giving up on job
폐업한
application, it is at a
자영업자
record
수도
high level.
연간 100만
And
명입니다.
small businesses that are closing their businesses
취약계층의
have
가계
reached
대출
1 million
연체율은
per
또
year.
급등하고 있습니다.
And we are also seeing a soaring of the default rate
가계만의
in the
문제가
household
아니라
debt for the
금융의
marginalized.
취약성까지
And it is not only
드러내고
for the
있습니다.
households, but it is also
코로나
showing
팬데믹도
the
견뎌낸 우리 경제가
vulnerabilities in finances as
지난
well.
3년간
Our economy
너무
overcame
심각한
COVID
위기로
pandemic.
빠져들었습니다.
However, over the past 3 years, we are
특히
facing a
지난
very serious crisis. In particular, as for the December 3rd illegal declaration of martial law, this was a heavy blow to the already slowing down domestic economics. Starting with the U.S. triggered terror shock and the conflicts in Israel and Iran, the international situation is so volatile that it is hard to predict. And that is why now, for the economy to be vitalized once again, the government should take the next step. In an economic crisis, if the government were to not do anything and only be fixed on tightening, this will be the negligence of irresponsibility, and the government will be in self-denial of its presence. The biggest responsibility of the government is to protect the lives of our citizens. So the government should be the one protecting the lives of our citizens. And the government should also be one that is responding to crisis in practical terms. It should not be about belief or slogan, but actual actions that revitalizes the economy and the livelihoods is the direction that the new government should take. Honorable citizens, and also National Assemblymen, there has been an old saying that economy is the timing, and I believe that now is that timing. On the first day that I came into office, through the administrative order, I had formed the Urgent Economy Inspection TF, and for the revitalization of the livelihoods and overcoming of the economic downturn, I have allocated supplementary budget amounting to 30.5 trillion won. And I think it is really important that we revitalize the domestic market and our economy through quick allocation of the budget and quick execution. We should make sure that we do not miss on the golden time of recovery, and I would like to ask the National Assembly's cooperation. I'll now go into the details. First, to counter the downturn of domestic demand, I have included 11.3 trillion won of budget for consumption stimulus. So I also allocated the consumption voucher amounting to about 30 trillion won to replenish the consumption power, and I am trying to support the vitalization of the domestic market. So this consumption voucher will be uniformly paid out to all citizens, but we have designed it so that we are providing a thicker, customized support for the marginalized and the population extinguishing regions. All citizens will be receiving 150,000 won. However, depending on the situations, the maximum amount of the payment will be 520,000 won. And also to breathe in life into regional economies, we have inserted additional national budget of 600 billion won for the regional love vouchers. And we also increased the discount rate with the expansion of the issuance by 8 trillion won. The consumption voucher and the regional love voucher will first be supporting the outer regions, and based on the philosophy of the new government, we decided to allocate more budget for the other regions.
둘째, 경기 활성화를 위한 투자 촉진
And
예산
secondly,
3조 9천억
we
원을
have allocated
편성했습니다.
3.9 trillion won of budget
도로,
to
항만 등
stimulate
집행
investment.
가능한 SOC에 조기
So we are
투자하고
going to provide early investment on
부동산
SOC that can be
PF
executed in areas such as railroads, roads, and ports. We also supported liquidity amounting to 5.4 trillion won in the PF market and the real estate market that is facing a downturn. And regarding the AI and renewable energy, we expanded the amount of investment. And we also provided funding of 1.3 trillion won in the parent fund for ventures and the small and middle-sized businesses so that we can revitalize the growth engine of Korea.
셋째로
Thirdly,
소상공인 취약계층
to
등을
support the
지원하는
marginalized and small
민생
businesses,
안정 예산을 5조
we
원
included 5
남았습니다.
trillion won of budget for the livelihood stabilization. Even if we are facing the same economic crisis, the weight of the pain cannot all be the same.
코로나 팬데믹 위기부터 12.3
Starting from the
불법
crisis of COVID
비상경까지
pandemic to
극심한
the
고통을
December
겪고
3rd
계신
martial law
소상공인,
declaration,
자영업자,
small businesses
취약계층을 위한 특단의
and
대책이
the marginalized
필요합니다.
are facing dire pains, and we need to make special measures so that we can help them. The new government will be incinerating the long-term overdue bonds for 1.13 million marginalized borrowers that cannot pay off their debt. So we're going to get rid of the debt of less than 50 million won that has been overdue for more than 7 years, so that those people who have lost the power for repayment due to being in a bankruptcy state can have an opportunity to come back to the economic activities. And for small businesses that are diligently repaying their debt, we're going to expand the installment periods, and we're also going to be additionally exempting them with the interest rate. And we're also going to be providing support for the small businesses that went bankrupt through subsidies. And we're also going to expand the wages for employment and also be providing a system for employment. And this is amounting to 1.6 trillion Korean won.
넷째,
foresee.
10조 3천억 원 규모의
We
세입
also
경쟁을
allocated
추진해서
the tax budget amounting to 10.3 trillion won so that we can inform others about the start of normalization of finances. So we reflected this tax budget within the supplementary budget plan. This decision was made so that we can stabilize the finances and to show our respect for the budget deliberation and confirmation of the National Assembly. In 2023 and 2024, for the past 2 years, we faced a loss of tax revenue amounting to around 80 trillion won, and we believe that this will be the case once again this year. So if we were to leave it as is, then the government is not able to process a lot of the budgets in a large amount. That means that the government cannot spend the budget as planned, and it also decreases the subsidies provided to other provincial finances as well. This will lead to the operation of tightened finances and will act as an obstacle in recovery of the economy and the livelihoods. The new government is trying to go with finances policies that is without a rule violation or any expediencies to be transparent. So we're going to reflect the tax budget within the supplementary budget so that even a small amount of budget will be allocated in the right places at the right time. Honorable citizens, Mr. Speaker Woo Won-sik, and National Assemblymen. So when we are trying to revitalize the economy and the livelihoods, we cannot have the opposition party or the governing party. So as for this supplementary budget plan, this will act as the cornerstone to resolve the issues that we face in the economic crisis, and it is the minimum measure that we can take for recovery. And if there is any details that has not been included in the supplementary plan, we would like to ask you to voice your opinions without hesitations in the deliberation process. In particular, as for the members of the opposition party, if you believe that there are items that should be included in the budget plan, or if you want to add anything else, we would like to ask you to provide your opinions at any time. Fortunately, after the inauguration of the new government, we were able to see the resolution of uncertainties in politics, and we are seeing an improvement in the consumption sentiments. The government will continue to act as a solid foundation for the citizens. We're going to be centered on practical spirits so that we can look at the livelihoods of our citizens, and in order to open up a new path to economic growth and recovery of the economy, we're going to do our utmost. So we'll do our best so that we can revitalize the economy of Republic of Korea once more, and we would like to ask the active cooperation of the National Assembly so that we can create a country that is happy for our citizens. And I would also like to thank the members of the People Power Party for participating.
Now that was South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung delivering his speech on the second supplementary budget. He's now shaking hands with National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik before he walks out of the National Assembly. He's now addressed lawmakers on the extra budget plan, asking for bipartisan support. Now, since taking office earlier this month, President Lee Jae-myung has been working to get this bipartisan support on the budget plan that's worth 30.5 trillion Korean won, or 22 billion US dollars. That includes 20.2 trillion won of new spending to spur economic growth, and 10.3 trillion won to make up for extra budget. Now, as the government seeks to boost spending and revive the country's economy, the Lee administration is now looking to get that extra budget bill. And President Lee Jae-myung, as we just heard, has just delivered his speech on the second supplementary budget. So for more on this and the country's economic policy, we're joined by Professor Shin Se-don, professor at the Division of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University. Professor Shin, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So we just heard the president give his speech. What's your overall assessment of this second supplementary budget plan?
Well, Korean economy has been suffering from 2022, and every economic statistics show that it is almost like unheard of kind of economic depression, so to speak, and realizing the significance of economic slowdown or recession in some aspect. I think the president's address about supplementary budget is very right on time, and the size, which is about 30.5 trillion won, is among top four supplementary budget throughout Korean history. So the magnitude of supplementary budget is not small at all. And I think depending upon the outcome, whether economy really recovers, I think there should be another possibility of a second supplementary budget in the later this year. Generally speaking, I think it is right on time, and the magnitude is also proper. That is my assessment.
Right, like you mentioned, this is a large amount of budget, and a large amount of that bill includes a universal cash handout scheme for all citizens. Will this help revive the country's economy?
Well, universal kind of a cash handout amounts to about 5 trillion won, which is about 1/6 of the total supplementary budget. So you can criticize that 5 trillion won's worth of cash handout may not be enough, but general handout of about 15.2 trillion won, I think that is pretty much the amount that has been given in right after the coronavirus in 2020. So, well, it could be some significant help to general consumption. So, I think, judging from past history, general handout of about 14 or 15 trillion won, I think pretty significant amount, and we could expect what its effect upon positive effect on economic consumption. That I think has to be seen in the future.
Right, so we are seeing the government working to revive the economy. So what is the number one priority, do you think, the administration should focus on in its economic policy?
He mentioned, President Lee has mentioned several times in his address that the recovery of citizens' livelihood, which has been having a significant kind of a trouble for the last 3 years since 2022, is the utmost important kind of economic agenda for current administration. And as I said, the 30 trillion won's supplementary budget may not be enough. So we have to determine whether another supplementary budget could be necessary depending upon the outcome. Judging from, slow economic performances from slowing export growth, I think this supplementary budget may not be enough to turn around Korean economy, because in the past, like 2020, the Moon Jae-in government spent about 67 trillion won for the supplementary budget, in which case there have been 4 supplementary budget in 2020, and in 2021 there's 2 supplementary budget altogether about 50 trillion. And 2022, there has been another 55 trillion won supplementary budget. So for the last 3 years, 2020, 2021, 2022, we had at least a couple of, budgetary supplementary budgets. So judging from that situation, I think you cannot rule out another second supplementary budget during 2025. That is my expectation.
I see. I guess we'll have to see if we'll see more extra budget plans coming in. And another key issue the current administration faces is tariffs with the United States. And the country's top trade negotiator is right now in Washington to hold the first tariff talks since President Lee took office. So what leverage does South Korea have in tariff negotiations with the Trump administration?
I think most important issue regarding U.S. and Korean trade issue is that Korea has been having too much trade surplus against the United States. In other words, we are exporting a lot more than we import from the United States. So major Korean kind of leverage in issue of trade between the United States and Korea is we have to import more from the United States. We have to import more natural gases. We have to import more of agricultural products, and we have to import more automobile from the United States. As long as we can reduce trade surplus against the United States, I think that there should be no trouble in the trades between Korea and the United States. So I feel that there are plenty of leverage for Korean government in solving the trade issues because we could import more from the United States.
I see. And South Korea, faces reciprocal tariffs of 25%. So if this measure takes effect, how would that affect Korean businesses?
Oh, that's going to have a significant, negative effect upon Korean exports. Most major companies in Korea are exporting mostly to the United States, and the United States levied 25%, which is it's a pretty devastating kind of a blow to Korean exports. So I think, as I said, the issue of reciprocal tariff is because Korean economy has been enjoying a lot of surplus against the United States. So as long as we reduce trade surplus against the United States, I think there's a plenty of room that we could lower the reciprocal tariff from 25% to either 10% or 5%, or I think 0%, it could be possible if we can significantly reduce trade surplus against the United States. I'm pretty hopeful that we could come up with, very kind of a positive deal between the United States and Korea. And because of that, I think the reciprocal tariff could reduce down not to 10%, but to 5% or even 0%.
All right, I guess we'll have to see how that negotiations play out. Professor Shin, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans for talks between the U.S. and Iran next week about a potential nuclear agreement. He also warned that tensions between Israel and Iran could flare up again. Our Shinayong reports.
Speaking at a press conference at the end of the NATO summit in the Netherlands on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump said the U.S. will meet with Iran next week to discuss a potential nuclear agreement, which had been put on hold amid conflict between Israel and Iran.
We're going to talk to them next week with Iran. We may sign an agreement. I don't know. The only thing we'd be asking for is what we were asking for before about we want no nuclear, but we destroyed the nuclear. In other words, it's destroyed.
Although Israel and Iran agreed to a ceasefire after 12 days of fighting, Trump did not rule out the possibility that the conflict could reignite possibly soon.
And they're both tired, exhausted. They fought very, very hard. And can it start again? I guess someday it can. It could maybe start soon.
Citing a report from the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, Trump reaffirmed that Iran's nuclear facilities were completely destroyed by U.S. military strikes last weekend. He also criticized CNN and the New York Times for reporting that the damage was limited.
Some great statements just came out from the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission and from Iran, as you know. that it was complete, total destruction. And CNN turned out to be fake news, as always. That's why they have no credibility. That's why New York Times and CNN make up a phony story to get some hits.
CNN reported on Tuesday that according to an early U.S. intelligence assessment, last weekend's U.S. strikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities did not destroy the core components of Tehran's nuclear program and likely only set it back by months. Meanwhile, Iran's state-affiliated news outlet Noor News reported that Iran's parliament approved a bill on Wednesday to stop working with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran will suspend cooperation with the IAEA until the security of the nuclear facilities is guaranteed. He also said that Iran will speed up its peaceful nuclear program. This means it will no longer allow the agency to inspect or verify its nuclear sites and activities. 신하영, Arirang News.
And also in the Netherlands, as NATO member states wrapped up their summit, they agreed to increase their defense spending over the next 10 years. This comes as U.S. President Donald Trump has been critical of the allies' lack of contribution. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Members of the NATO alliance on Wednesday agreed to raise their defense spending target from the current 2% of GDP to 5% by 2035. In a joint declaration, the military bloc agreed to invest 5% annually to ensure its individual and collective obligations. According to the declaration, the 5% figure is made up of at least 3.5% on pure defense, while the remaining 1.5% going to security and defense-related critical infrastructure. In addition, member countries will be required to submit annual plans that show a credible, incremental path to reach the goal of 5%. The agreement comes as U.S. President Donald Trump had been critical of the military bloc for its lack of contribution to defense spending. Meanwhile, after Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said his country could meet its commitments to NATO while spending much less than the new target of 5% of GDP, Trump threatened Spain with higher tariffs if it did not commit to the same target as all the members.
You know what we're going to do? We're negotiating with Spain on a trade deal. We're going to make them pay twice as much. And I'm actually serious about that.
President Trump also held a closed-door meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Wednesday at The Hague, after which the U.S. president didn't rule out sending Ukraine monetary and defense aid.
So let me just tell you, they do want to have the anti-missile missiles, okay, as they call them, the Patriots. And we're going to see if we can make some available. You know, they're very hard to get.
Trump appeared to have shifted tone compared to last meeting with Zelensky, while the Ukrainian leader also offered similar praise of Trump, adding Ukraine is ready to buy more U.S. weapons. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And South Korea's National Security Advisor Ri Sung-nak met with U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio on Wednesday on the sidelines of the NATO summit in the Netherlands. The two agreed on the need to arrange a bilateral summit as soon as possible and to maintain close contact. They also discussed ways to strengthen further what they referred to as the successful alliance between Seoul and Washington. While attending the two-day summit on behalf of President Lee Jae-myung, we held one-on-one talks with Japan's foreign minister, as well as top national security and foreign policy advisors from the Czech Republic and the Netherlands to explore ways to deepen cooperation. The direct train between Pyongyang and Moscow, which resumed service after a 5-year suspension due to COVID-19, arrived in Moscow on Wednesday. According to Russia's TASS news agency, the train, which departed from Pyongyang on the 17th of this month, arrived at the Yaroslavsky train station in Moscow. A representative of the North Korean Railway Authority said that there were no passengers on the train and only crew members. The service will be available twice a month, with a train from Pyongyang departing on the 3rd and 17th of every month, and that from Moscow departing on the 12th and 26th. The one-way trip takes 8 days and is reportedly the longest direct train journey in the world, spanning over 10,000 kilometers. The final confirmation hearing for President Lee Jae-myung's pick for Prime Minister ended Wednesday without resuming after clashes between rival parties. This comes as the main opposition People Power Party walked out in the afternoon, accusing nominee Kim Min-seok of not submitting essential documents, mainly about his wealth and family. The ruling Democratic Party hit back, saying the opposition was making politically motivated attacks. With the PPP unlikely to agree to adopting the confirmation hearing report for Kim, the DP said it will push for a parliamentary vote to approve him by July 4th. Now, as we mark 75 years since the outbreak of the Korean War, our correspondent Oh Soo-young spoke with the ambassador of the Netherlands on the values and challenges South Korea and Europe face for deeper security cooperation.
75 years after the Korean War began, the Netherlands ambassador to Seoul says new security challenges call for continued cooperation between South Korea and the nations that defended it. In an interview with Arirang News, Ambassador Peter van der Pleet reflected on the bilateral partnership, built on the sacrifices made by thousands of Dutch troops who fought for South Korea's freedom and sovereignty. When North Korean and Chinese forces invaded the South in 1950, the Netherlands sent over 5,000 troops to help the South as part of the United Nations Command. At least 125 Dutch soldiers lost their lives. Even after the ceasefire in 1953, the Netherlands to this day remains committed to peace on the peninsula.
We are certainly for peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. That is also a reason that we are still with the United Nations Command, because the United Nations Command is there to promote stability on the Korean peninsula.
As global conflicts blur the traditional lines between the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions, the ambassador stresses that South Korea's security is becoming deeply linked to Europe's.
The best example of that is the Russian military strategic cooperation with North Korea, with North Korean weapons and troops going to Russia to help Russia in its war of aggression against a sovereign state, Ukraine, but also in the other direction, the things that North Korea gets from Russia, and including military technology and other items.
As such, South Korea has been increasing its cooperation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, supplying NATO countries with artillery shells, tanks, howitzers, and light combat aircraft. Since 2022, South Korea has been invited to the annual NATO summits, which this year took place at The Hague.
It's also a historic summit because the European members of NATO will take a larger, greater responsibility for Europe's defense. And I think that also offers opportunities for Korea to be even more involved in defense cooperation.
Beyond defense, the ambassador says economic security has emerged as another central area of cooperation as countries work to secure supply chains, protect critical technologies, and shield their economies from strategic vulnerabilities. The two countries in 2023 agreed to collaborate in the semiconductor industry, the most consequential component that powers all things digital. Going forward, as South Korea's new administration sets out its so-called pragmatic diplomacy, hinting at engagement with Beijing and Moscow, the Dutch envoy says pragmatism is inherently grounded in principles.
Pragmatism is also based on a foundation of certain values and principles. Just a pragmatic policy without values or principles is really, what is it really? And I think the values that we have in common should be treasured. Respect for the international legal order, a rule-based international system, for peace, for democracy.
75 years after the war began and still continues, South Korea and the Netherlands face new security tests, but stay bound by the shared values that first brought Dutch forces to this distant shore. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Yoon Se-young, and this is The World Now. We begin in Kenya today, where according to Amnesty Kenya, at least 16 people have been killed and over 400 injured in anti-government protests across the country. Most of the fatalities reportedly occurred during violent clashes with the police in the capital, Nairobi. Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets on Wednesday, marking the one-year anniversary of last year's deadly protest against the controversial tax bill. Police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse crowds, leading to numerous casualties. The Independent Policing Oversight Authority, a government-funded watchdog, reported that at least 61 people were arrested nationwide during the unrest. Last year's demonstrations resulted in over 60 deaths and a dramatic storming of the parliament building. The latest protests reflect public frustration with government policies and the use of excessive force by security agencies. U.S. stocks ended mixed on Wednesday as President Trump declared a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Shares of Nvidia in particular jumped over 4%, closing at a record high for the first time since January. The strong performance helped lift the Nasdaq Composite by about 0.3%, and the S&P 500 briefly touched an all-time intraday high before slipping slightly to close at a little over 6,092. Nvidia's market capitalization has now reached $3.77 trillion, making it the world's most valuable company, narrowly ahead of Microsoft. Analysts say investors remain confident in Nvidia's dominance in the AI sector, despite tightened export controls to China under the Trump administration. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that he is considering 3 to 4 candidates to replace Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Speaking at a press conference following a NATO summit in The Hague, Trump did not name any specific individuals, but strongly criticized Powell and emphasized the need for a change in leadership at the Fed. The remarks came amid tensions between Powell and Trump over interest rate policies. This week, Powell criticized Trump's tariff policies during a congressional testimony and indicated that the central bank plans to hold interest rates steady for now to control inflation. Powell's current term as Fed chair runs through May 2026. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and journalist Lauren Sanchez have moved their wedding party in Venice to a more isolated location. The change was made due to security concerns and the risk of protest. And the couple had planned to celebrate in the popular Cannaregio district, but after local groups threatened to block access to the venue, organizers moved the event to the historic Arsenal Hall in the eastern Castello district. The wedding ceremony's exact date and location remain secret, but it is expected to take place between Thursday and Saturday. Around 200 to 250 high-profile guests from entertainment, politics, and finance are expected to attend.
The monsoon rains will take a brief break. However, scattered rain will continue until this morning in the capital area Gangwon-do and Chungcheongbuk-do province. It will be mostly 5 to 10 millimeters before letting up. In other regions, we'll see mostly cloudy skies. Temperatures are set to rise again. The capital will be much more bearable, hovering in the upper 20s. But those in Daegu need to brace for a scorcher with a temperature peaking at 34 degrees Celsius by Sunday. And of course, high humidity will only make it feel more uncomfortable. Even today feels like temperatures will be a couple of degrees higher than these numbers. Seoul topping out at 27 degrees, Daejeon 28, and Gwangju at 29. Looking ahead, monsoon rains will return to most parts of the country starting this weekend. Rain will begin in the central region early Saturday morning, then expand to southern regions by the afternoon. The capital area can expect the rain to continue on and off into early next week.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.